My name is Robin Wright. I write for The New Yorker. I've spent a half century covering the Middle East. Love this part of the world. Our topic today is kind of looking at U.S. transatlantic relations, given the change of administration and the broad sweep of things, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and beyond. So I want to begin with Fred, and I will read from the new national security strategy that was released on December 4th. It says that U.S. national security strategy has just dropped, puts Western Hemisphere at its center, trashes Europe, and sends mixed signals on China and India. On a snowy winter day, European diplomats were dismayed, while some in Magda rejoiced. It's a 33-page document. It's radical in its structure, but it basically is saying to the Europeans, it seems to be saying to the Europeans, you're on your own. So, Fred, maybe you can begin by explaining what that means and what you think the real intentions of the Trump administration are.
Thanks, Robin. It's great to be here. I'd like to thank the Doha Forum for inviting me and for the Qatar government's incredible hospitality. This document is really nothing new. It reflects the America First approach to U.S. national security that we saw in President Trump's first term. It has some changes in this approach. The idea that it's anyway negative to Europe or anti-Europe, I don't think is fair. If you look at it, it says that there's significant sentiment towards Europe by the United States, by members of the Trump administration, and the Europe section is entitled Make Europe Strong Again. This is not an anti-Europe document, but it has three significant areas that I think are important for this panel. First of all, it talks about how America is going to try to shift some of its military strength to deal with security threats in the Indo-Pacific and away from Europe. It's not backing out of Europe, but it wants Europe to play a more significant role in defending its region. And it believes that Europe should take responsibility for European security challenges, mainly Ukraine. I think that if you read this very carefully, this is something that is consistent with the president's desire to focus on primarily American security interests first. And the reason that there's such a focus on the Western Hemisphere is because of concern about out-of-control, unvetted immigration, which many in the U.S. believes has hurt our country and is destroying Europe, and we don't want that to happen here. The second point is that there are elements of this document that talk about how we would like to see Europe, frankly, be better and greater, to be more democratic, to be more tolerant of dissent, to abandon economic policies that are not just bad for Europe, but bad for our country, and also move away from destructive, out-of-control, unvetted immigration. I think the reason that European elites hate this document isn't that these ideas are wrong, because they know their policies have failed, and they don't want their people to seize upon them. So I think there's a reason why the economists hated this document and said things, Robin, as what you were describing. Also very important in this document is not just ending the war in Ukraine, and we know President Trump has been talking for several years of the urgency of stopping the killing, but doing something that really people aren't talking about, and that is establishing strategic stability with Russia. And on this panel, we're looking at the new transatlantic ties and the evolving global order. And this addresses the question, what is the future of Europe's relationship with Russia? What is America's relationship with Russia? Basically, the downside of this terrible war in Ukraine, which I think was largely caused by Joe Biden's incompetence and weakness, is that it has driven Russia into the hands of China. And this China-Russia axis is very dangerous for global security. Russia is historically a European power. And looking beyond the war in Ukraine, the purpose of this document concerning Ukraine and Russia is to try to find a way to bring Russia back as a state in good standing of Europe. And that's going to be hard, because there's not going to be a just solution to Ukraine. There may be a solution that stops the killing, but ultimately there may be a solution that is as fair as we can get, stops the killing, and maybe a long-term armistice. Then we talk about how do we get Russia back into the community of European nations, into the community of civilized nations. So that's where I think this document really is. That's what the Trump administration is aiming for.
I want to go to Magda next, but one of the members of our forum here this year spoke earlier, he spoke yesterday, and she did an interpretive piece for Foreign Affairs. And she writes, Europeans lull themselves into the belief that President Trump is unpredictable and inconsistent and ultimately manageable. This is strangely reassuring, but wrong. From the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance's speech denigrating Europe at the Munich Security Conference in February to the new U.S. strategy issued December 4th, the Trump administration has long held a clear and consistent vision for Europe, one that prioritizes U.S.-Russia ties and seeks to divide and conquer the continent, which much of the dirty work carried out by nationalist, right-wing European forces that now enjoy backing from both Moscow and Washington. It is a long time past for Europe to realize that when it comes to the Russian-Ukraine war and the continent's security, it is best left alone. At worst, it now faces two adversaries, Russia in the east and Trump's United States in the west. So Magda, your thoughts?
Thank you very much, and I echo my gratitude to Doha Forum and the hospitality here. I just want to there's a lot to unpack in the national security strategy, in these reactions, etc. And I think it's good by starting from the European point of view to ask, what are the legitimate criticisms of Europe in the national security strategy? So where is it right? And then looking beyond that is, what is the strategy, if we can call that, or actions of the Trump administration so far told us about where is U.S. still a partner to fix these things, right? So I'll take these two one by one. If you look at what does the national security strategy say about Europe, again, it was very clear, predictable, a reiteration of much what Vice President J.D. Vance has said at the Munich Security Conference. Europe is in economic and civilizational decline. It is strategically naive on Russia and dangerously dependent on China. It has built these dependencies on Russia that have made it weak to start with, and now it's hysterical, now it's overcorrecting, and it needs U.S. strategic guidance to achieve a reset. And on China, it needs to sharpen focus and confront China because it's completely dependent on it for all sorts of sectors, right? So much of the stuff that's flagged in there, you can find in Draghi report on economic decline, especially that the EU-US gap in economy has grown from 2002 of 15% to 30% in 2023. That EU has only 4 out of top 50 global tech companies. Its tech revenue fell share as part of the global revenue, and the US accounts for over 63% of EU defense procurement. So we're dangerously dependent on the US for security. We have built dependencies on Russia and China. Now, next step. Does actually, even if these criticisms are valid, what is Trump administration doing so far to help us correct them? And I'll just take these 3 points. If the concern, especially on uncontrolled immigration and civilizational decline, is really about that, then I just wonder why Trump administration can't work with center-right conservative parties that are currently in the government, for instance in Germany, and have, as point of their agenda, kind of controlled immigration and fixing that system, rather than sort of inserting itself into domestic politics that it claims it wants to stay out of, and supporting the parties that are not just sort of anti-immigration and far right, but they're anti-EU. They're actually seeking to weaken and destroy the EU, which provides single market power, EU leverage, to sort of deal with the United States on all sort of issues such as tech regulation, etc. So there is that bit. The second bit on sort of, it calls Europe to sort of diversify and says you should have never touched these Russian resources. Just in parallel, as Trump negotiating team is seeking a commercial reset with Russia built on the top of the very resources that Europeans are told they should have never touched. So exploration of sort of commercial reset and contracts in gas, oil, Arctic exploration, etc., which is something that Europeans currently see as sort of going against their strategic interests. And on China, as right as the national security strategy is, European problem right now is that it is no longer sort of able to see a US with which it can sort of move with in lockstep, because President Trump has escalated with China on the trade war, but he has also shown willing to make deals in order to get Chinese to release their choke points, like on the rare earth export controls. So I think that while it's absolutely correct in the diagnosis of the key economic and defense problems, I'm not sure we still have an alliance which helps us sort of address these weaknesses. And instead, there's more of a perception in the EU that sort of US is weaponizing these weaknesses and connecting them into sort of a single negotiating framework where it's exploring European vulnerabilities and security to press it on trade, on tech regulation, etc.
Great. Mabel, would you like to weigh in on our strategy, on the U.S. national strategy, and your thoughts about, China's reaction and role in all of this?
Thank you, Doha Forum, for your kind invitation. This is my 8th time of Doha Forum. It's quite impressive again, this session. Thanks for having me. Actually, on this topic, I'm the outsider of transatlantic tie, but I'm the international observer of this kind of cross-Atlantic relation. I'm also the frequent participant of a Munich Security Conference. I was a witness of J.D. Vance's controversial speech on EU, on their value and the domestic policies. I was shocked at that moment. But regarding, before we go deeper, I would like to highlight 3 global shifts on the global landscape. Of course, multipolarity is a reality, which is the biggest backdrop of our era. The U.S., right now, in terms of U.S., this week they just issued the national security document, strategic document, which also noted that they are withdrawing from the spreading covering to the Western Hemisphere. They mentioned China in the security document fewer than the last vision in 2017. And they use a word like the near peer trading on China. I think it's similar to Trump used the word in social media G2 before they met President Xi this year. US is withdrawing and pulling back from the so-called comprehensive hegemony to the focused some area to look after and reduce the budget on the global affairs, on the United Nations and the US aid. On the other hand, they compel their traditional allies to increase the proportion of the defense spending in the GDP to 5%, treating their partner with a kind of manner that I call it transactional manner. I can understand as US should consolidate their domestic market and meet the domestic development and their American First initiative. So they should spend money on those. On the other hand, the second shift is euro. I think euro right now is stuck in a moment I called awkward moment. As Europe seek the strategic autonomy, independence, von der Leyen said this is the moment of Europe's strategic independence, but it's not easy to achieve that. As we know, according to the defense industry right now, the situation and the intelligence system sharing, I don't think it's already done. It's still on the way to develop it. So this is second. I think the sentiment of anxiety is full of our European countries. When I visit them, one hand they want to keep the strategic independent. On the other hand, the capability cannot meet that. So it's very awkward moment for them. The third one is we have to see the global South countries are waking up. So this is a multipolar world. We mentioned about global order. China is part of the global South, but this time when I visited Johannesburg for the G20, I find that with the absence of U.S. in key sessions, the global South countries still keep forward the agenda, shaping the agenda for themselves. I think this is a new phenomenon. And a few years ago, the BRICS countries, their GDP has surpassed that of G7. It's also a shock for many developed countries. So I think their voice should be heard, and the rise of global South is the new rise of the global force. So this is another dynamic for our topic today. Maybe, this is the best timing for Europe and China cooperation on many global governance and bilateral trade, economy, maybe in many other, the third places like Africa and other. So I think for us, China cannot gain anything between the US and the EU's tension. We just want to keep the stability and the benefit from the global integration. China is good at doing business and earn money from those big business and make sure that others can earn money from us. We open the market. So this is our basic attitude on this. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to go back to Fred, I think, because this is where we started. And for better or worse, you represent the Trump thinking about this, about its national security strategy. But I think what we're really interested in is this a kind of blip on the screen? Will the next president come in with a different strategy, as has been the way of, every president we've had? Should this not be considered an important document? Or is this setting the pattern for a future set of one of those global moments where it may not achieve all its goals, but it makes such a difference that some of its principles linger on long after President Trump?
I think it's a strategy that will be around for a long time because it's reacting to some current developments. The Ukraine war is a reality. America's security requirements in the Pacific are a reality, and President Trump is not the first president who talked about a pivot to Asia. Previous presidents didn't do it. This president is determined to do that. But I wanted to answer a couple of things by my fellow panelists, which I thought were interesting. It is true that the current German government wants to do more about out-of-control immigration, but I think it's a little too late, that this has really been an enormous problem for Europe that I could talk about longer. But concerning this document on Europe, it really is positive for Europe, but it contains tough love, and it says things that the European elitists don't want to hear. I heard someone say that this document says that Europe is the enemy. That's not true, but the European elitists, they are the enemy. They're people who are hurting the people of Europe. They're people who are working against the interests of the United States. Let's talk about Ukraine, because we need Europe's help for Ukraine. And the document mentions something that I thought was extraordinary, and that is that there are German chemical companies that have moved to China to take advantage of cheap Russian energy that they can't acquire in Europe. This is not helping us solve the war in Ukraine. The EU recently said that it will stop buying energy from Russia in 2027. That's too late. So Europe lectures Trump at being pro-Putin for not doing enough about Putin. What is Europe doing about Putin? And I thought Christina Amanpour, who I don't usually agree with, had a very good point yesterday when she said to one of the panelists, where's Europe's peace plan for Russia, for the Ukraine war? You don't like Trump's. Where's your peace plan? Why haven't you pushed one since the war broke out in 2022? You may not like President Trump, but he started a diplomatic process, and peace takes time. I disagree with the administration in that I think this will take some time to resolve, months, maybe years, of putting pressure on Putin. I don't think there's an easy or quick solution. But I do think Trump is making progress. He's making progress in getting Zelensky to recognize that the final solution is not going to be fair, it's not going to be just, but it will stop the killing, and hopefully we can get a fair solution when Putin leaves the political scene. It's not something that people really want to talk about. So I think that all these things mean that what we're hearing right now from this administration, given the reality of this war with Ukraine, and there doesn't seem to be an alternative, that these ideas are going to persevere.
Would you like to respond to that?
I think it takes us very naturally in exactly the sort of next step in the conversation is sort of what is European response, and how could they be more strategic about their interests? And I actually agree with most of the things that you said, except that I don't think so far European leaders, if you want to talk about the key leaders, have been lecturing President Trump. In fact, and I don't even recommend that as a strategy if you don't have leverage. I mean, lecturing without leverage behind you gets you to the point where Ms. Kaja Kallas has ended, being denied meetings with Secretary of State. So not even having access. We're too dependent to actually afford that. I think what has been the European reaction pattern so far is that in fact, the designated good cops of Europe, such as Secretary General Mark Rutte, Friedrich Merz, Alexander Stubb, the Finnish president, have avoided public confrontation. They have, in fact, each time engaged in private outreach in the White House, mixing sort of flattery with royal receptions, with purchases, commitments to purchase US weapons and LNG, commitment to spend 5% within the NATO framework to reach the capabilities, sort of constantly proposing edits to US position on Russia and Ukraine, which they see as going against European interests. And I think there we should just be plain open. There's bits of American outreach to Russia and its sort of proposals on Ukraine that are strategically divergent from how Europeans perceive their interests currently. And I think the best sort of illustration of that is the disagreement on how to use Russian frozen assets. Europeans would like to use these to finance Ukraine's defense and war effort and continue purchasing American weapons. And Americans, current administration or negotiating team at least, would like to use them to invest in joint US-Russian fund seeking commercial reset with Russia, in order partly to kind of in this, pursue business interests, but also to sort of separate Russia from China. So I think there's that kind of crucial bit on this issue where there is strategic divergence. Now, absolutely agree with you. I was actually driving from my hotel this morning and there was this one FIFA sort of slogan on one of the hotels saying, play your own game. Right? Are the Europeans actually playing their own game? How should they behave differently? And I think there's 2 points there. Yes, be more proactive, stop waiting for US proposals, present Europe's own proposal on Ukraine, get your act together, what do you want to do with sanctions if US decides to lift its sanctions, and sort of, be a little bit more in a proactive posture, all true. But for that, you really need to build leverage. Right? And Europeans, I think, are very bad at that, and they have, not only vis-a-vis China or its sort of main big ally and protector, United States, they've never been good in building and using leverage, not even in the Western Balkans where you have states of 3.5 million, inhabitants, like tiny states like Bosnia. And so what do you have to do there? And I think this is sort of the question. Are we going to wait for the next administration to correct course? Maybe we should remind ourselves that these are structural factors which were started with President Obama through Biden and continuing now, where Europeans really need to, A, sort of reduce strategic vulnerabilities, and that is particular in defense. So the question is, with these 5% that we're spending now and huge debt that Germany is getting into, to spend on defense, what are going to be the investment patterns? How do we build more resilience? And Vice President J.D. Vance keeps telling us, do not be a client, build your own industrial defense base. Our stockpiles are low. We cannot afford to sort of supply everyone. So we need a strong partner like Israel. And so going into that direction. But I think the second question is, we're in a situation where we have a fire in our backyard and we don't want to sort of start fighting with the firefighter. And I think that is our key dependency, where how do we at the same time build resilience and become more independent, but also keep America in because we need them currently. And that's sort of the key dilemma. And I think that's where we need to get better at identifying assets that Americans value. Understanding what it is that Americans value in defense and the military sort of realm, but also in terms of our single market and economic assets that we have vis-a-vis the U.S. So, and then of course learn how to apply it.
One quick point. I just wrote in an article on Friday. I think all of Russia's frozen assets should be spent to defend and develop Ukraine.
Mabel.
As I mentioned, I'm the outside of a transatlantic type, but I'm the international observer. I think the trust across Atlantic right now is cracking. It's not easy to be being recovered like the first administration. When the first administration of Trump, they imposed the tariff or do something else for the transatlantic partner or allies, they can recover so easy. But right now, EU is seeking the strategic autonomy and independence without any administration of US. I think this is one direction, and China respect their choice. And I think under this context, we can do more cooperation on the global governance when US pulling back from withdraw from the global governance and global affairs. So, for example, both of us respect the climate action. We respect multilateralism. We respect the UN, and we can work together on the Ukraine-Russia war through make sure Europe in the peace talk for Ukraine-Russia. So this is what we can do. A little bit feedback for Fleitz about China's role in the Ukraine territorial integrity of peace plan for Ukraine-Russia war, to say that we would like to make sure them sit on the table for the peace talk and the negotiations, through negotiation to deal with those things. So I think it's very clear. And you said the oil, the cheap oil or the cheap energy. I think that India and other countries, this is also bought a lot of oil from Ukraine. This is normal business. The oil is not in the border with China. So China is one of the biggest trading partner of more than 150 countries. We are the biggest manufacturing country. We need to do something and make something for the world. Without China, we use those energies, the world can paralyzed. We need the factory and need those machines working. So I think this is big feedback from me. And the global South countries, a lot of them, those things, we know that, especially on the Gaza issue or the Ukraine issue, right now, the global South countries' need cannot be ignored by European policymakers. In the overcoming 5 years, most of the global growth expected to come from those regions, like Latin Americans, ASEAN countries, and GCC region. a lot. So if Europe want to keep their influence in the world, definitely the policymakers should pay more attention on the global south needs. This is my recommendation. And another thing is that between EU and China, we have more cooperation potential in the, not just like the economic or trade circle, also on the global governance and the third party places in terms of the trade economy. Because right now EU paid more attention on China and more dependent on China's market. From January to August 2025, Germany's trade with China is bigger than with the US. You can see because the imposing tariff from Transatlantic, the other side. Euro and China right now busy in build up the cooperation on the clean energy, EV cars, and many other issues, and the manufacturing capability, high-end manufacturing, and including the key minerals, those things included. On the other hand, you know, maybe China and the EU can work together on the comprehensive agreement on investment, resume it, explore the digital economy cooperation and the rare minerals processing. A lot of potential. Another field, maybe in terms of the global governance, there's a gap widening between the transatlantic relation and the US pullback from those global governance. Maybe the climate change cooperation on the technology improvement for the climate action. On the other hand, maybe we can do something for many other things, including we can resume the United Nations reform together and many other global affairs. The last one I would like to mention that, you know, usually we often identify the competition between EU and China in Africa and other third parties. But we can see the reality on the ground. The cooperation is much more than competition. Cooperation make much more sense. We can see in African, both China and Euro, we have the complementary strengths. For example, China can offer the manufacturing capability, infrastructure building capability, and the new energy technology. Europe countries can bring more like the governance experience, international institution on development and the standards. Many fields we can work together to accelerate the development of the African countries. It's good for everybody, and we can, both of us can benefit from that kind of cooperation.
Thanks so much. The second half of our discussion is supposed to be about the evolving global order. Big topic, and so I've encouraged each of the speakers to try to look ahead, to give us something to chew on. If they can be bold, brave, and thinking about not just today and a current document, but also what is the future of the Western Alliance? I mean, is it, you know, are they friendly and do they cooperate, but is it the end of the kind of interdependence that is played out on the military field and the economy and so forth? So let me start with Magda there. Yeah.
I got used to reacting to Fred. I quite like that, so now it's I go first. I woke up this morning and opened my sort of Twitter feed, and one of the things that popped up at me was this very alarming tweet by one of the European journalists saying this is catastrophic. 5 US officials have shared with the media information that in this week's meetings between, well, I guess last week, between European and American officials, US has announced that it has given Europe deadline by 2027 to take over all of the conventional military capabilities in NATO, otherwise it's going to pull out. I do not believe that this is where we're going. But I do think it sort of points to the strategic cacophony that we're hearing from Washington on where America is going in terms of its commitment to the alliance. So if we're thinking about sort of future scenarios, 27 is quite, quite soon, just 2 years away less. And if we're sort of thinking 5 to 10 years ahead, then the question is what is going to happen to the sort of geopolitical concept of the West, US and EU, and are we going to have a strong NATO alliance or not? And also, mind you, what is going to happen to the European Union itself? How strong is European Union going to be? And I think, Joseph and I like to say there's no one future, there's multiple future depending on the choices you do today. And I think many of these choices are in European hands. So I really think, and we've said it so many times, this is the moment for Europe to sort of take on greater responsibility. And I frankly sometimes feel guilty as a think tanker telling the officials what they need to do, because this is probably the most difficult time for Europeans to actually achieve its goals, being sort of squeezed in a triple coercion dilemma between Russia militarily, between China, that certainly it would be great to cooperate on all of these things, but China is holding quite strong chokeholds that it hasn't released, for instance, export controls on rare earth materials that it has now released on US, but not on European companies, so it's affecting Germany in big way. With the US, on the other hand, that is sort of really, on one hand, saying, oh, we're there for you, but on the other, all of the signals point to a different direction. And so I go back to the question of how does Europe, which is, again, difficult, manage to sort of focus with put laser focus on its own economic competitiveness. A lot of recommendations by Draghi in his report on boosting its competitiveness, were there before President Trump. How does it sort of manage to invest smartly? Because this is a one-off spending. Once Germany has spent this money, there's not going to be another amount for defense. To make sort of German and European military-industrial complex more resilient. And then how does it really manage to sort of deal with this strategic cacophony that we currently have in Washington? I think, the leaks that we just saw as, US is pulling out by 2027 if Europeans don't reach that goal, come from bits in the administration that are really interested to see strategic retrenchment, even if it sort of crashes the alliance in the moment. But there's others in Washington who are sort of pushing back against it, and everyone is sort of in competition to influence the president. So I think again, a lot of it boils down to how capable we prove of meeting that. I'm not an optimist, but.
That's the hard part, isn't it? Fred, do you want to go next? And your sense of the West and how viable it is once we say to Europe, you need to take more responsibility?
I think it's a reality that Europe will take more responsibility, but this idea that we're going to pull out of NATO by 2027, that's not in the national security document. There were a lot of ideas like that the U.S. would also pull troops out of South Korea, pull out of Asia. That wasn't in the document either. It's not going to be. There's a healthy debate within the Trump administration on what America's strategic interests should be, where we should put our troops. The fact that somebody leaked an idea like that to the newspaper doesn't mean that it's true. But I do think there will be changes in America's relationship with its friends and allies and competitors around the world. And it was sort of summarized by things that the president said during his recent trip to Saudi Arabia, when he said that he doesn't think America should have permanent enemies, and to talk about how we have to have tolerance for nations and systems we may disagree with. He tried to make the case to nations where we do have real disagreements, Russia, Iran, China. Work with us, make a deal with us, and we'll all become prosperous. There's no reason for us to be, and Iran, did I say Iran? Unfortunately, the Iranians don't listen to that. and a month later, we bombed Iran's nuclear program to stop them from pursuing nuclear weapons, which I think was one of the biggest accomplishments of Trump's two presidencies. I think in terms of a world order, there's a lot of promise for American cooperation with China. I think it's clear that that's what President Trump wants. He does not want confrontation. He wants cooperation. I'm optimistic that China will abide by new sanctions, oil sanctions, against Russia for Ukraine. We can't stop the war in Ukraine without China's help. And if China wants to be seen as a power who's going to be leading a new global order, I don't support a Chinese-led global order, but assuming China is serious about that, for China to be lumped together with Russia and Iran and North Korea as a so-called axis, this is a rogues gallery that's nothing to be proud of. And my hope is that China will move away from those states, build broader alliances, not lock themselves close to Russia, which is engaging in an act of aggression that is offensive to the rules-based global order. If you support the rules-based global order, you have to be against the war in Ukraine. India should stop buying oil and gas from Russia. So should China, every state. Don't lecture the United States that Trump is close to Putin when these other states are doing business with Putin, that they're helping finance the war with Putin. This is not something to be proud of, and if we're going to have a more just global order, we have to stop this war, and other nations have to work with the president to do that. I always talked about how I think Europe can do more to do that. Europe should be sending out regular demarches to nations around the world to stop trading with states that buy Russian energy. That would be enormously helpful, rather than complaining they're being excluded from the negotiations. This is a new world order where Europe asserts itself, shows its confidence to make the world a better place. Stand up to Putin, stand up to President Xi, let's stop this war. I think that's the beginning of stability after this era.
Mabel, we're running out of time, so if you would like to have the last two words.
Thank you for having me again. Actually, I think the most prominent lesson for Europe from my angle is that don't put all the things in one basket. Actually, relying on one single party is too risky. So in the multipolar world, I think Europe can engage with more parties. China has opened the market for European countries. And of course, open market for US. We have more than 17 enterprises from US earn money every day in China. So China conducted CIIE, Shanghai Expo, to open the market to everybody. So I appreciate Trump and President Trump and President Xi's deal is that we can, share the market together and work together, mutual respect. Maybe under his words is G2 or something else, but it's kind of mutual respect, I think. On the other hand is that we can win-win cooperation on some specific targeted area. At least right now, this national security strategy document treated China not like the last version, that is strategic rivalry. I think right now we should seek the strategic stability rather than strategic rivalry between US and China. So just now Fleitz is optimistic, me too. I'm optimistic on the US and China relation. I think if US is withdraw from the comprehensive hegemony, shifting to the more pragmatic, more taking care of their own homeland, I think it's good for the multipolar world. And of course, there are many public goods need offered by some specific party. There's a global vacuum and gap, but we should work together. Maybe on the stage, the G3 among us, the Euro, China, and US, of course. We can do something together. Still, there's some room for us potentially to work together on the cooperation. And regarding to the China's role again on the Ukraine-Russia war, I think China is actually the new rising power of the geopolitical issue. We should wait for more time for China to rise on many issues and many fronts. This is all far from China, not on the border of China, to be honest. And US used to be the leader of the world after Second World War. Right now, you pulling back But you need somebody to, instead of that role, take some time. There's not so quick to develop like kind of angle or role by the other parties. So China's just still a big market to share with the benefit with others. So like that's why President Trump and President Xi is so complementary on many sides, as they would like to do the business with each other. That is the kind of without the ideologic angle. This is my basic opinion. Thank you.
Thank you all really for a stimulating conversation. I enjoyed hearing you all. I hope we can do this again in a year and see what we all sound like. Please join me in thanking them.